Momo. Chapter 4. Two Special Friends. Even when people have a great many friends, there are always one or two they love best, and Momo was no exception. She had two very special friends who came to see her every day and shared what little they had with her. One was young and the other old, and Momo could not have said which of them she loved more. The old man's name was Beppo Road Sweeper. Although he must have had a proper surname, everyone, including Beppo himself, used the nickname that described his job, which was sweeping roads. Beppo lived near the amphitheater in a homemade shack built of bricks, corrugated iron and tar paper. He was not much taller than Momo, being an exceptionally small man and bent-backed into the bargain. He always kept his head cocked to one side. It was big, with a single tuft of white hair on top, and wore a diminutive pair of steel-rimmed spectacles on his nose. Beppo was widely believed to be not quite right in his head. This was because, when asked a question, he would give an amiable smile and say nothing. If, after pondering the question, he felt it needed no answer, he still said nothing. If it did, he would ponder what answer to give. He could take as long as a couple of hours to reply, or even a whole day. By this time, the person who had asked the question would have forgotten what it was, so Beppo's answer seemed peculiar in the extreme. Only Momo was capable of waiting patiently enough to grasp his meaning. She knew that Beppo took as long as he did because he was determined never to say anything untrue. In his opinion, all the world's misfortunes stemmed from the countless untruths, both deliberate and unintentional, which people told because of haste or carelessness. Every morning, long before daybreak, Beppo rode his squeaky old bicycle to a big depot in town. There he and his fellow road sweepers waited in the yard to be issued brooms and pushcarts and told which streets to sweep. Beppo enjoyed these hours before dawn, when the city was still asleep, and he did his work willingly and well. It was a useful job, and he knew it. He swept his allotted streets slowly but steadily, drawing a deep breath before every step and every stroke of the broom. Step, breathe, sweep, breathe, step, breathe, sweep. Every so often he would pause a while, staring thoughtfully into the distance. And then he would begin again. Step, breathe, sweep, and so on. While progressing in this way, with a dirty street ahead of him and a clean one behind, he often had grand ideas. They were ideas that couldn't easily be put into words, though. Ideas as hard to define as a half-remembered scent or a color seen in a dream. When sitting with Momo after work, he would tell her his grand ideas, and her special way of listening would loosen his tongue and bring the right words to his lips. "You see, Momo," he told her one day, "it's like this. Sometimes, when you've a long street ahead of you, you think how terribly long it is and feel sure you will never get it swept." He gazed silently into space before continuing. "And then you start to hurry," he went on. "You work faster and faster, and every time you look up, there seems to be just as much left to sweep as before, and you try even harder. And you panic, and in the end, you're out of breath and have to stop. And still, the street stretches away in front of you. That's not the way to do it. He pondered a while. Then he said, "You must never think of the whole street at once. Understand? You must only concentrate on the next step, the next breath, the next stroke of the broom, and the next, nothing else." Again he paused for thought before adding, "That way you enjoy your work, which is important, because then you make a good job of it. And that's how it ought to be." There was another long silence. At last he went on. "And all at once, before you know it, you find you've swept the whole street clean, bit by bit. What's more, you aren't out of breath." He nodded to himself. "That's important too," he concluded. Another time, when he came and sat down beside Momo, she could tell from his silence that he was thinking hard and had something very special to tell her. Suddenly, he looked her in the eye and said, "I recognized us." It was a long time before he spoke again. Then he said softly, "It happens sometimes, at midday, when everything's asleep in the heat of the sun. The world goes transparent, like river water, if you know what I mean. You can see the bottom." He nodded and relapsed into silence. Then he said even more softly, "There are other times, other ages, down there at the bottom." He pondered again for a long time, searching for the right words. They seemed to elude him, because he suddenly said in a perfectly normal tone of voice, "I was sweeping alongside the old city wall today. There different colored stones in it. There are 5 different colored stones in it. They are arranged like this, see?" He drew a big T in the dust with his forefinger and looked at it with his head on one side. All at once he whispered, "I recognized them. The stones, I mean." After yet another long silence, he went on haltingly. "They are stones from olden times, when the wall was first built. Many hands helped to build the wall. But those stones were put there by 2 particular people. They were meant as a sign, you see. I recognized it." Beppo rubbed his eyes. The next time he spoke, it was with something of an effort. "They looked quite different then, those 2. Quite different." His concluding words sounded almost defiant. "I recognized them, though," he said. "They were you and me. I recognized us." People could hardly be blamed for smiling when they heard Beppo road sweeper say such things. Many of them used to tap their heads meaningfully behind his back, but Momo loved him and treasured every word he uttered. Momo's other special friend was not only young, but the exact opposite of Beppo in every aspect. A handsome youth with dreamy eyes and an incredible gift of the gab. He was always playing practical jokes and had such a carefree, infectious laugh that people couldn't help joining in. His first name was Girolamo, but everyone called him Guido. Like Beppo, Guido took his surname from his job, though he didn't have a proper job at all. One of his many unofficial activities was showing tourists around the city, so he was universally known as Guido Guide. His sole qualification for the job was a peaked cap, which he promptly clapped on his head whenever any tourists strayed into the neighborhood. Then, wearing his most earnest expression, he would march up and offer to show them the sights. If they were rash enough to accept, Guido let fly. He bombarded his unfortunate listeners with such a multitude of made-up names, dates, and historical events that their heads started spinning. Some of them saw through him and walked off in a huff, but the majority took his tales at face value and dropped a few coins into his cap when he handed it around at the end of a sightseeing tour. Although Guido's neighbors used to chuckle at his flights of fancy, they sometimes looked stern and remarked that it wasn't really right to take good money for dreaming up a pack of lies. "I'm only doing what poets do," Guido would argue. "Anyway, my customers get their money's worth, don't they? I give them exactly what they want. Maybe you won't find my stories in a guidebook, but what's the difference? Who knows if the stuff in the guidebooks isn't made up too, only no one remembers anymore. Besides, what do you mean by true and untrue? Who can be sure what happened here 1,000 or 2,000 years ago? Can you?" The others admitted they couldn't. "There you are then," Guido cried triumphantly. "How can you call my stories untrue? Things may have happened just the way I say they did, in which case I've been telling the gospel truth." It was hard to counter an argument like that, especially when you were up against a fast talker like Guido. Unfortunately for him, however, not many tourists wanted to see the amphitheater, so he often had to turn his hand to other jobs. When the occasion arose, he would act as park-keeper, dog walker, deliverer of love letters, mourner at funerals, witness at weddings, souvenir seller, cat's meat man, and many other things besides. But Guido dreamed of becoming rich and famous someday. He planned to live in a fabulous, beautiful mansion set in spacious grounds, to eat off gold plates and sleep between silken sheets. He pictured himself as resplendent in his future fame as a kind of sun, and the rays of that sun already warmed him in his poverty, from afar, as it were. "I'll do it too," he would exclaim when other people scoffed at his dreams. "You mark my words." Quite how he was going to do it, not even he could have told them, for Guido held a low opinion of perseverance and hard work. "What's so clever about working hard?" he said to Momo. "Anyone can get rich quick that way, but who wants to look like the people who have sold themselves body and soul for money's sake? Well, they can count me out, even if there are times when I don't have the price of a cup of coffee. I'm still me. Guido is still Guido." Although it seemed improbable that two people as dissimilar as Guido Guide and Beppo Road Sweeper, with their different attitudes to life and the world in general, should have become friends, they did. Strangely enough, Beppo was the only person who never chided Guido for his irresponsibility, and just as strangely, fast-talking Guido was the only person who never poked fun at eccentric old Beppo. This, too, may have had something to do with the way Momo listened to them both. None of the three suspected that a shadow was soon to fall, not only across their friendship, but across the entire neighborhood. An ever-growing shadow that was already enfolding the city in its cold, dark embrace. It advanced day by day like an invading army, silently and surreptitiously, meeting no resistance because no one was really aware of it. But who exactly were the invaders? Even old Beppo, who saw much that escaped other people, failed to notice the men in grey, who busily roamed the city in ever-increasing numbers. It wasn't that they were invisible, you simply saw them without noticing them. They had an uncanny knack of making themselves so inconspicuous that you either overlooked them or forgot ever having seen them. The very fact that they had no need to conceal themselves enabled them to go about their business in utter secrecy. Since nobody noticed them, nobody stopped to wonder where they had come from, or, indeed, were still coming from, for their numbers continued to grow with every passing day. The men in grey drove through the streets in smart grey limousines, haunted every building, frequented every restaurant. From time to time, they would jot something down in their little grey notebooks. They were dressed from head to foot in grey suits, the color of a spider's web. Even their faces were grey. They wore grey bowler hats and smoked small grey cigars. And none of them went anywhere without a steel grey briefcase in his hand. Guide Guido was as unaware as everyone else that several of these men in grey had reconnoitered the amphitheater, busily writing in their notebooks as they did so. Momo alone had caught sight of their shadowy figures peering over the edge of the ruined building. They signaled to each other and put their heads together as if conferring. Although she could hear nothing, Momo suddenly shivered, as she had never shivered before. She drew her baggy jacket more tightly around her, but it did no good because the chill in the air was no ordinary chill. Then the man in grey disappeared. Momo heard no soft but majestic music that night, as she so often did, but the next day life went on as usual. She thought no more about her weird visitors, and it wasn't long before she, too, forgot them.